The boarding agent's voice cut through the terminal noise with surgical precision. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The reservation shows only one confirmed seat. The second ticket was never processed." Susan felt the world tilt. She gripped the counter edge, her knuckles white against the laminate. Behind her, Ashley clutched her worn stuffed rabbit, the one she'd insisted on bringing for the beach adventure. "But I paid for both. I have the confirmation email." Susan's voice cracked as she pulled up her phone with shaking hands, showing the receipt she'd stared at for weeks, the one that represented 3 months of double shifts and skipped meals. The agent's expression shifted to something resembling pity. "The system shows a processing error. You'd need to purchase another ticket at gate price. That would be $1,800. Susan's whisper barely registered as sound. Ashley tugged at her mother's worn cardigan. "Mommy, are we not going to see the ocean?" Her 6-year-old voice was small, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" Before continuing the story, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories to you. That question, innocent and devastating, shattered the last of Susan's composure. She knelt down, eye level with her daughter, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. "No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. Mommy just, ma'am, I need you to step aside. There are other passengers." Susan stood, pulling Ashley close, and moved away from the desk. Around them, families streamed toward the gate, laughing children with new suitcases, couples holding boarding passes like golden tickets. The terminal lights felt too bright, the air too thin. She'd promised Ashley this trip. For months, she'd promised. The words echoed in her mind as she watched her daughter's face, watching realization slowly creep in like a shadow. Across the terminal, separated by glass walls and an entire economic universe, Gustavo Costa stood in the VIP lounge with an untouched espresso growing cold in his hand. He'd seen countless transactions in his life, deals worth millions, exchanges that determined who rose and who fell. But something about the woman at gate 47 made him pause. It wasn't the way she held herself, though her posture spoke of someone accustomed to carrying weight far beyond her frame. It wasn't even the child, though the little girl's yellow jacket stood out like a sunbeam in the gray terminal crowd. It was the precise moment her face changed, when hope died and was immediately replaced by the terrible strength required to comfort someone else through your own devastation. Gustavo set down his cup. He'd come to this airport to escape, to board a flight that would take him far from the pressure closing in on his empire. Key executives had been poached. His overseas partners were demanding concessions. And somewhere in this city, Marcus Dalton was planning his next move in a corporate battle that could reshape entire industries. But for just a moment, he'd wanted to breathe, to be anonymous, to remember what it felt like to be something other than a relentless force in tailored suits. The woman was crying now, not loudly, not dramatically. Just silent tears that she wiped away before her daughter could see, turning her face toward the window where planes taxied beneath a slate sky. Gustavo stood. His assistant, Marco, materialized at his elbow. "Sir, the woman and child at gate 47. Find out what they need." Marco hesitated. "Sir, the flight board's in 20 minutes. And we still have the situation with Dalton's acquisition attempt. I'm aware of our situations." Gustavo's voice carried the weight of authority that had built empires and crushed competitors. "Do what I asked." By the time Marco returned, Gustavo had already moved closer to the gate area, keeping his distance but watching. The little girl was sitting on a plastic chair now, swinging her legs, trying so hard to be brave while her mother made a phone call that was clearly going nowhere. "Ticketing error," Marco reported quietly. "The mother paid for 2 seats 3 months ago through a budget site. Something got corrupted in the system. She's trying to get a refund, but it will take weeks and they leave today or not at all." Gustavo finished. He'd built his fortune understanding exactly how systems could crush ordinary people. How much to fix it? First class has availability. $1,800 for a single seat. Or book them both into first class. Upgrade whatever hotel they're staying at to the resort's presidential suite. Arrange a car service on the other end. Marco's eyebrow lifted fractionally. "Sir, and do it in the next 5 minutes." Anonymously. Gustavo. Marco's voice dropped to a whisper only his boss could hear. After what happened Tuesday, after Dalton's latest move, we can't afford to draw attention. I'm not drawing attention. I'm buying 2 tickets. Gustavo's eyes remained on the woman, who had hung up and was now crouching beside her daughter, having what was clearly a very gentle, very painful conversation. 5 minutes, Marco. What Gustavo didn't say, what he couldn't say, even to his most trusted confidant, was that he'd just watched this woman do something he'd forgotten how to do, put someone else's heart before her own survival instinct. In his world, that kind of selflessness was extinction-level rare. Marco disappeared, phone already pressed to his ear. Gustavo watched the woman gather their single small suitcase, watched her take her daughter's hand, preparing to walk away from the gate and back into whatever hard life was waiting for them beyond this airport. Then the woman's phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Susan pulled out her phone with the weary expression of someone expecting more bad news. Gustavo saw her face change, confusion first, then disbelief, then something that looked like she'd forgotten how to process joy. She read the screen again. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Mommy?" Ashley stood up, concern replacing her brave face. "What's wrong?" "Baby," Susan's voice broke. "Baby, someone I don't understand." She showed her daughter the phone. The little girl in the yellow jacket jumped up, squealing, wrapping her arms around her mother's neck with the pure, uncomplicated happiness only children could summon. From his position near the window, Gustavo watched them embrace. He didn't smile. Men like him rarely did, but something in his chest shifted, something he hadn't felt in years. Susan was crying again, but different tears now. She kept checking her phone as if the messages might disappear. 2 first-class tickets. Presidential suite confirmation. A car service itinerary. All appearing in her email like magic, like the universe had finally decided to stop punishing her for existing. The gate agent called her back to the desk, professional confusion giving way to genuine warmth as she processed the new bookings. Ashley bounced on her toes, rabbit clutched tight, whispering, "We're going, we're going, we're going," like a prayer finally answered. Gustavo turned toward his own gate, already boarding. Marco caught up, slightly out of breath. "It's done. They'll never know it was you." "Good. Sir, if I may, why?" Gustavo paused, watching the woman and child disappear down the jetway, heading toward a paradise they'd almost lost. "Because I could." He didn't tell Marco the rest. That for $1,800 and a few phone calls, he'd remembered what power was actually for. That in a life built on calculated moves and ruthless efficiency, sometimes the best decision was the one that made absolutely no strategic sense. As Gustavo boarded his own flight, settling into first class several rows ahead of where Susan and Ashley would soon be seated, he had no idea that this impulse, this single act of unexpected kindness, would become the most consequential decision of his life. Paradise was waiting. And when they returned, nothing would ever be the same. The resort was the kind of place Susan had only seen in magazines left behind in the diner where she worked double shifts. White sand that felt like powder between her toes. Water so blue it seemed photoshopped. Palm trees swaying against a sunset that painted the sky in shades of gold and rose that didn't seem possible in real life. Ashley had cried when she first saw the ocean. Not sad tears, pure overwhelmed joy. She'd run straight into the waves still wearing her yellow jacket, and Susan had let her, laughing for the first time in months as she chased her daughter through the surf. That had been 3 days ago. 3 days of pinching herself every morning when she woke up in a suite larger than her entire apartment. 3 days of watching Ashley collect seashells and build sandcastles and simply be a carefree 6-year-old instead of the too serious child who'd learned to ask, "Can we afford it?" before requesting anything. 3 days of trying not to think about who had done this for them and why. The resort staff treated them like royalty. The concierge knew Ashley's name, had arranged a private snorkeling lesson that morning. The restaurants never presented a bill. Everything was taken care of. Susan had stopped asking questions after the first day, deciding to accept this miracle rather than interrogate it into dust. But tonight, as she sat at the beachfront restaurant while Ashley slept soundly upstairs with the resort's most trusted babysitter, Susan couldn't stop wondering. The reservation had appeared on her phone that afternoon: sunset dinner for two. Your daughter will be well cared for. You deserve an evening, friend. She'd almost deleted it, almost stayed in the room. But something, curiosity, loneliness, or maybe just the way the sunset looked from their balcony, had made her put on the one dress she'd packed, the simple blue one she'd bought from a thrift store for job interviews. Now she sat alone at a table for two, watching the sky turn impossible colors, feeling overdressed and underprepared and completely out of place. I was hoping you'd come. The voice came from behind her low, accented with something European she couldn't quite place. Susan turned and felt her breath catch. The man standing there looked like he'd stepped out of those same magazines as the resort. Tall, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, wearing linen and confidence like they were made for him. But it was his eyes that held her, dark, intense, and somehow familiar in a way that made her pulse quicken. I'm sorry, Susan managed. The dinner reservation. I wasn't sure you'd accept. He gestured to the empty chair. May I? Susan's instinct was to say no, to run back to the safety of the suite and Ashley and the life she understood. But something about the way he stood there, patient, almost vulnerable despite his obvious wealth, made her nod. He sat with the economical grace of someone accustomed to being watched. I'm Gustavo. Susan. She gripped her water glass like a lifeline. Are you the one who sent the invitation? I am. He signaled the waiter with a minimal gesture that somehow conveyed exactly what he wanted. I hope that's not presumptuous. That depends on why you invited me. Susan heard the defensive edge in her voice and hated it. This man had probably just been kind. She was so unused to kindness that she'd turned it into suspicion. But Gustavo's expression softened, understanding rather than offense. Because I've watched you with your daughter for 3 days, and you haven't taken a single moment for yourself. Because you deserve a meal where you're not cutting someone else's food first. Because he paused, something flickering across his face. Because I wanted to meet the woman who could smile like that. Susan felt heat rise to her cheeks. You've been watching me? The resort is small. And your daughter's laugh carries beautifully across the beach. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She has excellent taste in seashells. Despite herself, Susan laughed. She has 73 of them. I counted when I tried to pack them this morning. Only 73? There are at least 2 more days left. I expect that number to double. The waiter appeared with wine, something that probably cost more than Susan's monthly rent. She started to protest, but Gustavo was already pouring. Just 1 glass. To sunsets and seashells and moments we didn't plan for. Susan lifted her glass, meeting his eyes. There was something there, something that made her feel like the ground had shifted slightly beneath her. To miracles we don't understand. Gustavo's hand froze for just a fraction of a second before he touched his glass to hers. To miracles. The meal that followed was unlike anything Susan had experienced. Not just the food, though each course was a small masterpiece, but the conversation. Gustavo asked about her life with genuine interest, and somehow Susan found herself talking about Ashley, about the challenges of single motherhood, about the dreams she'd packed away in the same place she kept her daughter's outgrown clothes. And Ashley's father? Gustavo asked quietly, in the space between the main course and dessert. Gone before she was born. Susan traced the rim of her wine glass. He wasn't ready to be a father. I was barely ready to be a mother. But Susan's voice caught. She's everything. I can see that. Gustavo's gaze was steady, warm. The way she looks at you. Like you hung the moon. I can barely afford to point at the moon. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. Love doesn't require solvency. Gustavo's voice carried weight, like he was speaking from experience. Though money certainly makes the practical elements easier. Susan studied him, the expensive watch, the casual way he inhabited luxury, the deference the staff showed him. You seem to know about the money part. What do you do, Gustavo? Something shuddered in his expression, so quick she almost missed it. I solve problems. Help people when I can. Spend too much time in offices and not enough time watching sunsets. It wasn't really an answer, and they both knew it. But Susan found she didn't care. Because when he looked at her like he was looking at her now, like she was the only person in a resort full of guests, the details seemed less important than the moment. "And you," he continued. "What would you do if money weren't an object?" Susan laughed. "That's like asking what I'd do if I could fly. Humor me." She looked out at the ocean, dark now except for the reflection of resort lights dancing on the waves. "I'd finish my degree. Early childhood education. I'd open a daycare for working mothers who can't afford the nice places. I'd give Ashley a backyard instead of a fire escape. She stopped, embarrassed by how much she'd revealed. "You'd give everyone else what you never had." Gustavo's voice was soft. "Why am I not surprised?" "Because you don't know me well enough to be surprised by anything." But Susan was smiling. "Then we should fix that." He stood, offering his hand. "Walk with me." Susan hesitated. Every practical instinct screamed warnings. She didn't know this man. Didn't know his last name or where he was from or why someone like him would waste an evening on someone like her. But the wine had softened her edges, and the sunset had made her brave, and when she placed her hand in his, the warmth that spread through her had nothing to do with the tropical air. They walked along the beach, waves lapping at their feet. Gustavo asked questions and actually listened to the answers. Susan found herself talking about things she hadn't said out loud in years, her fears, her hopes, the way motherhood had simultaneously narrowed and expanded her entire world. "You're remarkable," Gustavo said finally, as they paused near a cluster of palm trees, the resort glowing behind them like something out of a dream. "I'm ordinary," Susan corrected. "Spectacularly ordinary." "No." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Ordinary women don't sacrifice everything for their children. Ordinary women don't turn $1,800 of bad luck into gratitude instead of bitterness." He stopped, seeming to catch himself. But he was close now, close enough that Susan could smell his cologne, could count the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I should get back," she whispered, not moving. "Ashley is sleeping soundly. I checked before I came down." He smiled at her expression. "The babysitter has my number. Our number. The restaurant's. Our number." Like they were a unit. Like this was something more than a chance encounter between strangers who would part ways when the vacation ended. "Gustavo, I don't understand any of this." Susan's voice was barely audible over the waves. "Why are you being so kind to me?" He reached up, tucking a strand of wind-blown hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate, and Susan felt something in her chest crack open, something she'd sealed shut years ago when she'd decided that survival mattered more than feeling. "Because kindness is rare," he said quietly. "And when I find it, I want to protect it. Even if just for a few days." He was going to kiss her. Susan saw it in the way his gaze dropped to her lips, in the way he leaned closer. And God help her, she wanted him to. Wanted to remember what it felt like to be wanted for something other than the labor she could provide. But instead, Gustavo stepped back, breaking the spell. "Good night, Susan. Thank you for dinner." "You paid for dinner," she said, still dizzy from the almost kiss. "No." His smile was sad, knowing. "You gave me something much more valuable than a meal. You reminded me what it feels like to be human." He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the resort's landscaped gardens like a dream dissolving at dawn. Susan stood alone on the beach, heart pounding, mind racing. She didn't know who Gustavo really was. Didn't know what he wanted or why he'd chosen her. But as she walked back to the suite where Ashley slept surrounded by seashells and happy exhaustion, Susan realized something terrifying. For the first time in years, she wanted something for herself. And that wanting felt like the most dangerous thing in the world. The next morning arrived with the kind of brightness that made everything from the night before feel both more real and less possible. Susan woke to find Ashley already awake, nose pressed against the balcony window, counting boats on the horizon. "Mommy, can we go snorkeling again? Please?" "The fish man said he'd show me where the sea turtles live." Susan smiled, pushing away thoughts of dark eyes and almost kisses. "After breakfast, baby. Go brush your teeth." Her phone buzzed as Ashley skipped to the bathroom. A message from an unknown number. "There's a catamaran tour at 11. I've taken the liberty." Both of you are expected. Wear sunscreen. Susan stared at the screen. Part of her wanted to decline, to establish boundaries, to remember that this was temporary and he was a stranger, and she had no business feeling butterflies at the sight of a single-letter initial. But Ashley deserved magic. And if Susan was honest with herself, she wanted to see him again. She typed back, "You're very presumptuous." His response came immediately, "I've been told." Is that a yes? Despite herself, Susan laughed. It's a yes. The catamaran was smaller than she'd expected, intimate rather than crowded with tourists. Only a handful of other guests lounged on the netting as the boat cut through impossibly blue water. Gustavo stood near the bow, aviator sunglasses hiding his eyes, looking like he'd stepped out of a luxury advertisement. Ashley ran to him immediately, no shy hesitation. "Gustavo, Mommy said yes. Are we really going to see turtles?" He crouched down to her level, and something about the gesture made Susan's chest tight. Men didn't crouch for Ashley. Her own father had never even met her. "We are. And if we're very lucky, maybe dolphins too." He pulled a small waterproof camera from his pocket. "I thought you might want to take pictures. To remember." Ashley's eyes went wide. "For me? For you?" She threw her arms around his neck with the unself-conscious affection of childhood, and Susan saw Gustavo freeze for just a moment before his arms came up to return the embrace. When he stood, his expression was carefully neutral, but Susan had seen the flash of something vulnerable cross his face. "You're spoiling her," Susan said quietly as Ashley ran to the boat's edge with her new camera. "Good." Gustavo moved to stand beside her. "Someone should. I spoil her just fine. You sacrifice for her. That's different." His voice was gentle, not accusing. "Spoiling is frivolous and joyful and completely unnecessary. It's cotton candy and late bedtimes and cameras that will probably end up at the bottom of the ocean within an hour." "Hey," Ashley protested, having clearly overheard. "I'm responsible." Gustavo's laugh was low and genuine, and Susan realized she was seeing a different side of him, looser, less guarded. The boat's captain called for everyone to take their seats as they prepared to venture into deeper water. The morning unfolded like something from a dream. They did see turtles, 3 of them, ancient and graceful, gliding through the crystal water. Ashley shrieked with delight, snapping pictures frantically while Gustavo pointed out details, explaining with surprising knowledge about marine life and ecosystems. "You know a lot about turtles," Susan observed as they floated in a calm bay, Ashley splashing nearby with a pool noodle. "I know a lot about many things." He floated beside her, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed. "Most of it useless in daily life, but excellent for impressing 6-year-olds. And their mothers?" He turned to look at her, water droplets clinging to his eyelashes. "Is it working?" Before Susan could answer, one of the other guests shouted. A man had appeared on the beach, not resort staff, wrong energy entirely. He was photographing the boat with a long lens, focused and intent. Gustavo's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The relaxed vacation version of himself vanished, replaced by something cold and controlled. He swam to the boat with powerful strokes, pulling himself aboard with athletic grace Susan hadn't expected. He spoke rapidly to the captain in Spanish, his voice low and commanding. The captain's expression shifted from confusion to concern, and he immediately started the engine. "Gustavo." Susan had followed him, Ashley now clutched against her side. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." But his jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the beach. "A precaution. That man was taking pictures. Of you. Of the boat. Tourists take pictures." He softened slightly, seeing Ashley's worried expression. "I'm sorry. I thought I saw someone I knew. Someone I'd rather not deal with on vacation." It was a lie. Susan knew it was a lie the same way she knew when Ashley was hiding something. But before she could press, Gustavo's phone rang. He answered it, moving to the far end of the boat, and his body language told her everything she needed to know. Whoever Gustavo really was, he wasn't just a wealthy tourist looking to relax. The rest of the boat ride was subdued. Gustavo stayed on his phone for most of it, speaking in rapid Italian to someone named Marco. Ashley, sensing the tension, stayed close to Susan, clutching her camera and her rabbit. When they docked, Gustavo finally approached them. His smile was apologetic, but his eyes were still scanning, still watchful. "I'm sorry. I've ruined the day." "You haven't," Susan said, though it wasn't entirely true. "But you could tell me what's really going on." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him weighing options, calculating. It was the first time she'd seen him do math on whether to trust her, and it stung more than she wanted to admit. "I have business rivals," he said finally. "Men who would love to find leverage against me. I thought I'd left that world behind for a few days, but apparently I was wrong." "And we're leverage?" Susan's voice came out sharper than intended. "Is that what this is? Why you've been so generous?" "No." The word was immediate, almost fierce. "You are the opposite of my business. You are the only genuine thing I've experienced in years." Ashley tugged Susan's hand. "Mommy, I don't like it when grown-ups argue." Gustavo knelt again, meeting Ashley's eyes. "You're right. I'm sorry. How about ice cream? Would ice cream fix things?" "Ice cream fixes everything," Ashley declared with the certainty of childhood. But as they walked toward the resort's beach bar, Susan felt the first real tendrils of unease creeping in. The man on the beach. The phone calls. The way Gustavo had transformed from relaxed to hypervigilant in seconds. Paradise, she was learning, had shadows. And Gustavo carried his wherever he went. They sat at a beachside table, Ashley demolating a sundae, while Gustavo and Susan maintained careful conversation. He tried to recapture the lightness from earlier, but it felt forced now, performed. "I should tell you something," Gustavo said finally, after Ashley had run off to play in the sand. "My life back home is complicated. The work I do, the people I deal with, it's not always pleasant." "What kind of work?" "International business. Acquisitions, investments, corporate restructuring." He paused. "I make decisions that affect thousands of people, and not everyone agrees with those decisions." "So you have enemies?" "I have competitors who would prefer I didn't exist." He met her eyes. "Which is why I came here. To remember what it feels like to be just a man, not a target. Not a threat." Susan absorbed this, watching Ashley build a sandcastle. "And we're what?" "A pleasant distraction. You're a reminder that kindness still exists." His hand covered hers on the table, warm and solid. "That some people still see good in strangers instead of calculating their net worth." She should pull her hand away. Should take Ashley and retreat to their suite and stop letting this man, this complicated, secretive man, into their lives. But his thumb was tracing circles on her palm, and she was so tired of being strong alone. "When we go home," she said quietly, "this ends. You know that, right? You go back to your world, we go back to ours." Something flickered in Gustavo's expression, pain, determination, something she couldn't quite name. "Perhaps." "There's no perhaps. Look at us, Gustavo. Look at the reality. I am looking at you." His voice was low, intense. "And I'm seeing the only real thing I've found in a very long time. So forgive me if I'm not ready to accept that this ends just because geography says it should." Before Susan could respond, Ashley came running back, covered in sand and joy. "Mommy, come see. I built a castle with a tower and everything." Susan let herself be pulled away, but she felt Gustavo's gaze on her back. Felt the weight of decisions she wasn't ready to make. That night, after Ashley was asleep, Susan stood on the balcony watching the moon paint silver across the water. Her phone buzzed. "I haven't been entirely honest with you, but I want to be. Will you have breakfast with me tomorrow? Just us. I'll tell you everything." Susan stared at the message, her heart pounding. Everything about this screamed danger. Everything about him was too intense, too much, too far outside her carefully controlled world. But she was already typing, "Just us." 8 a.m. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, and somewhere in the resort, she imagined Gustavo reading her response, perhaps standing on his own balcony, perhaps wrestling with the same impossible feelings. Tomorrow, she'd learn the truth. Tomorrow, the fantasy would either deepen or shatter. Tonight, she let herself believe in magic a little longer. What would you do if someone's kindness came with complications you didn't understand, walk away, or risk finding out the truth? Drop your thoughts below, I'd love to hear what you'd choose. The flight home felt like traveling backward through a mirror. First class became coach, became the airport shuttle, became the city bus that dropped Susan and Ashley 3 blocks from their apartment building. The transition from paradise to pavement happened so fast that Susan wondered if the past week had actually existed or if she'd imagined the whole thing. Gustavo had kept his promise at breakfast that final morning. He told her everything, or at least a version of everything. He was the CEO of Costa International, a multinational corporation with interests in real estate, technology, and private equity. He was wealthy beyond anything Susan could conceptualize. He had enemies, rivals, complications that made her life look simple by comparison. And he wanted to see her again when they returned home. Susan had said no, gently but firmly. Because women like her didn't date men like him. Because Ashley needed stability, not a parade of uncertainty. Because fairy tales ended when the clock struck midnight and she'd already pushed her luck further than was wise. He'd accepted her decision with grace that felt like disappointment, and they'd parted at the airport with a handshake that lasted too long and eye contact that said everything their words couldn't. That had been 8 hours ago. Now Susan stood in the dim hallway of her apartment building, fumbling with keys while Ashley dozed against her shoulder, exhausted from travel and the crash back into reality. The apartment looked smaller than she remembered. Dingier. The crack in the ceiling seemed more pronounced, the carpet more worn. 7 days away had given her new eyes, and she hated what they saw. Home sweet home, she whispered, laying Ashley on the bed they shared. Her daughter barely stirred, clutching her rabbit and the waterproof camera Gustavo had given her, still half full of turtle pictures and sunset shots. Susan unpacked mechanically, putting away the few clothes they'd brought, tucking the seashells into a shoebox that would live under the bed. She was sorting laundry when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hope you arrive safely. Thank you for a week I won't forget. Gee, she stared at the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She should delete it. Should block the number. Should let this impossible thing die a natural death before it became complicated. Instead, she typed, "We're home. Ashley is already asleep, dreaming of turtles. Thank you for everything." His response came immediately. The turtles were the highlight of my year. Susan smiled despite herself, then firmly put the phone in a drawer. Tomorrow she'd return to the diner for the early shift. Tomorrow real life would reassert itself with bills and schedules and the grinding reality of survival. Tonight, she'd let herself remember what it felt like to be seen as something more than a struggling single mother. She fell asleep on the couch, too tired to unfold the bed, and dreamed of dark eyes and almost kisses and a man who looked at her like she was rare. Morning came with Ashley's excited chatter about going back to school and telling everyone about the vacation. Susan made breakfast from their meager supplies, mentally calculating what groceries she could afford before her next paycheck. The resort had been all-inclusive. She'd forgotten what it felt like to count the cost of eggs. She was washing dishes when she glanced out the window and froze. A black SUV sat parked across the street, gleaming and completely out of place in their neighborhood of rusted sedans and decades-old trucks. The windows were tinted, but Susan could see the shadow of someone in the driver's seat. Her first thought was police. Her second was repo company, though she owned nothing worth repossessing. Her third, creeping in with a mixture of hope and dread, was Gustavo. But that was impossible. She hadn't given him her address. Had barely told him what neighborhood she lived in during their conversations. The SUV didn't move. Just sat there, watching. Susan pulled Ashley away from the window. "Baby, go pick out your clothes for school. Something comfortable. But Mommy, always pick, today you pick. Go on." Once Ashley was occupied, Susan grabbed her phone. No new messages. She pulled up Gustavo's number, hesitated, then typed, "Did you send someone to my apartment?" The response was immediate. "What? No. Why? There's a black SUV outside. Just sitting there." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then her phone rang. "Susan." Gustavo's voice was tight, controlled. "Listen to me carefully. I need you to describe exactly what you see." The shift in his tone made her heart race. "It's just an SUV. Black. Tinted windows. It's probably nothing, license plate. Can you see it? Susan moved to the window, staying back from the glass. She rattled off the numbers she could make out. Gustavo swore softly in Italian. That's one of Marcus Dalton's vehicles. Susan, I need you to pack a bag. Take Ashley and go somewhere public. A coffee shop, the library, anywhere with people. Who is Marcus Dalton? Gustavo, you're scaring me. He's a competitor. A particularly ruthless one. She could hear him moving, the sound of car doors. I didn't think I was careful. No one should have connected you to me. Connected me to you? What does that even mean? Susan's voice rose, and she forced herself to stay calm for Ashley's sake. We had dinner. A boat ride. We're not connected. Someone took photos at the resort. The man on the beach. Gustavo's voice was hard now, the version of him she'd glimpsed on the catamaran. Dalton has been trying to find leverage against me for months. If he thinks you matter to me, I don't matter to you. I can't matter to you. But even as she said it, Susan knew it was too late. Whatever this was, it had already started, and men like Marcus Dalton didn't care about the truth. They cared about perception. I'm 15 minutes away. Pack a bag. Please. Susan wanted to argue, to insist this was insane, that she could handle one mysterious SUV. But the fear in Gustavo's voice, real fear, not the controlled concern of someone being cautious, made the decision for her. Okay, we'll go to the cafe 2 blocks over. The one with the I know which one. I'll find you. He hung up before she could ask how he knew, how he'd found her address, how any of this had become her reality. Ashley. Susan called, forcing her voice to stay light. Change of plans, baby. We're going to get pancakes before school. Doesn't that sound fun? Ashley emerged from the bedroom, delighted by this unexpected treat. Susan threw essentials into her shoulder bag with shaking hands, wallet, phone, Ashley's inhaler, the pepper spray she carried but had never used. They left through the back entrance, a habit Susan had developed years ago when Ashley's father had briefly tried to be involved before disappearing for good. The alley was empty, familiar, safe in its griminess. The cafe was warm and crowded with the morning rush. Susan ordered hot chocolate for Ashley and coffee she couldn't afford for herself, and they settled into a corner booth where she could watch the door. Ashley chattered about school while Susan's mind raced. This was crazy. She should call the police. Should take Ashley to her friend Maria's house across town. Should do anything except sit here waiting for a man she barely knew to rescue her from a situation she didn't understand. But she waited. 20 minutes later, Gustavo walked through the door, and the cafe seemed to contract around his presence. He wore a suit today, perfectly tailored, all pretense of the casual vacation version of himself gone. This was the CEO, the businessman, the man who made decisions that affected thousands. His eyes found her immediately, and the relief on his face was so stark it made her chest ache. Gustavo. Ashley lit up, waving. Are you here for pancakes too? He slid into the booth beside Susan, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating from him. I am. And to see my 2 favorite people. Did you miss us already? Ashley asked with the directness of children. More than you know. But his eyes were on Susan, searching her face. Are you both okay? We're fine. Gustavo, this is insane. One car doesn't mean it's not just the car. He pulled out his phone, showing her a screen she didn't understand, surveillance footage, security reports, something corporate and terrifying. Dalton has had people watching my movements for weeks. If he saw us together at the resort, he'll use it. That's how he operates. Use it how? I'm nobody. I'm a waitress with a daughter and student loans and nothing he could possibly want. Gustavo's jaw tightened. You're not nobody. Not to me. And that's exactly what he wants. The weight of those words settled between them. Ashley was distracted by her hot chocolate, oblivious to the adult tension, but Susan felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. This is why I said no, she whispered. This is exactly why we can't, I know. His hand found hers under the table, warm and steady. I know. And you were right. But it's too late now. He knows about you. Which means I need to keep you safe. I can keep myself safe. Susan. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I have money, resources, people who can make sure Dalton never gets near you or Ashley. Let me help. Please. Pride wanted her to refuse. Independence demanded she handle this herself. But when she looked at Ashley, happily swinging her legs and humming off-key, maternal instinct overrode everything else. What exactly are you proposing? Come stay at my estate. Both of you. It's secured, protected. You'll have your own wing, complete privacy. Just until I can neutralize Dalton's interest. I have work. Ashley has school. We have a life. I know. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the same gesture from the beach, and it felt like both comfort and promise. I'm not asking you to give up your life. Just let me protect it for a while. Susan looked at her daughter, thought about the black SUV, the photos from the resort, the cold calculation in Gustavo's description of Marcus Dalton. She thought about her tiny apartment with its single lock and fire escape that any determined person could climb. She thought about saying yes to help, maybe for the first time in her adult life. How long is a while? Gustavo's expression softened with something that looked like hope. However long it takes. Days. Weeks. I won't let anyone hurt you, Susan. Either of you. That's a promise. Ashley chose that moment to look up, hot chocolate mustache firmly in place. Are we going to Gustavo's house? Does it have a pool? Despite everything, Susan laughed. We're still discussing it, baby. It has a pool, Gustavo confirmed, smiling at Ashley. And a library. And probably too many rooms to count. Then we should definitely go, Mommy. It sounds like a castle. Susan met Gustavo's eyes over her daughter's head. She saw determination there, and concern, and something deeper that scared her more than mysterious SUVs or corporate rivals. She saw a man who had made her a promise he intended to keep, no matter the cost. Okay, she heard herself say. But just until things settle down. And we're keeping our apartment. Whatever you need. As they left the cafe together, Gustavo's hand on the small of her back, Ashley chattering about swimming pools, Susan caught sight of their reflection in the window. They looked like a family. And that, she realized, was the most dangerous thing of all. The estate was everything Ashley had imagined and more than Susan could process. Wrought iron gates that opened automatically. A driveway that curved through manicured grounds for what felt like a mile. A house, no, a mansion, that looked like it belonged in a European architecture magazine. Gustavo's driver pulled up to the main entrance, and Susan felt her resolve wavering with each passing second. This wasn't help. This was a different universe. It's too much, she whispered as Ashley pressed her face against the window, eyes wide with wonder. It's secure. Gustavo's voice was gentle but firm. That's all that matters right now. A woman in her 50s met them at the door, introduced as Elena, the house manager, and immediately swept Ashley away with promises of cookies and a tour of the grounds. Susan watched her daughter go, chattering excitedly, and felt the last of her defenses crumbling. We need to talk, Gustavo said once they were alone in what he called the small library, a room with floor-to-ceiling books and furniture that probably cost more than Susan's annual salary. Really talk. No more half-truths. Susan sat on the edge of a leather chair that probably required its own insurance policy. I think that would be wise. Gustavo poured himself a scotch from a crystal decanter, offered her one. She shook her head. She needed clarity, not courage from a glass. My full name is Gustavo Rafael Costa. I'm the CEO and majority shareholder of Costa International, a conglomerate worth approximately $43 billion. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was reciting his grocery list. We have interests in commercial real estate, private equity, technology acquisition, and offshore investments. I employ over 30,000 people across 6 continents. Susan's mouth went dry. She'd known he was wealthy. She hadn't known he was wealthy enough to make headlines. The man watching your apartment works for Marcus Dalton, who runs a competing firm. For the past 2 years, Dalton has been trying to absorb my company through a hostile takeover. He's failed repeatedly, so now he's shifted tactics to something more personal. Gustavo's jaw tightened. Finding weaknesses. Leverage. People who matter. I don't matter, Susan protested weakly. You do. He set down his glass and moved to crouch in front of her chair, the same way he had with Ashley. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the airport. Since I watched you choose your daughter's heart over your own pride. Since you looked at me like I was just a man instead of a balance sheet. Gustavo, let me finish. Please. His hands covered hers. I've spent 20 years building an empire. I've sacrificed relationships, sleep, any semblance of a normal life. I've made enemies and I've been ruthless when necessary, and somewhere along the way, I forgot why I was doing any of it. He paused, and Susan saw something vulnerable in his expression, something that didn't match the billionaire CEO persona. Then I saw you at that gate, and I remembered. I remembered what it feels like to care about something that isn't a quarterly earnings report. And I know it's fast, and I know it's complicated, but I won't let Dalton use you to get to me. Susan pulled her hands away, standing up to put distance between them. So, what are you proposing? That we hide here forever? That I uproot Ashley's entire life because you had a moment of conscience at an airport? No. Gustavo stood, his composure cracking slightly. I'm proposing that you let me handle this the way I handle all threats to things I value. Decisively. I'm not a corporate asset you can protect with lawyers and security teams. I know that. But Susan, Dalton doesn't care what you are to me. He only cares that you could be used as leverage. Which means you're in danger whether you stay here or go home. At least here, I can keep you safe. Susan paced to the window, looking out at grounds so vast she couldn't see the boundaries. You said you'd offer me employment. What does that mean? She heard him move closer, felt his presence behind her. I need someone to oversee my charitable foundation. It's been run by a board, but I want to expand our work with struggling families, education initiatives, childcare assistance. You'd be perfect for it. I'm a waitress with an incomplete degree. You're a woman who understands what it means to need help and how to accept it with dignity. That's worth more than any MBA. His voice softened. The salary would be $400,000 a year. Full benefits. Housing allowance. Educational trust for Ashley. Susan spun around. $400, that's absurd. You're trying to buy me. I'm trying to employ you for a job you'd be exceptional at while ensuring you never have to choose between your daughter's dreams and your bank account again. His eyes held hers. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to make me dependent on you. The opposite. Gustavo's voice turned sharp. I'm trying to make you independent of worry. Independent of the fear I saw in your eyes at that airport gate. You'd have your own money, your own purpose, your own cage. Susan finished. A gilded one, but still a cage. The word hung between them like an accusation. Gustavo's expression hardened, the vulnerable man disappearing behind the CEO mask. I see. So my protection is imprisonment. My assistance is manipulation. Tell me, Susan, what would you have me do? Send you back to that apartment where Dalton's people know exactly where to find you? Where there's one lock on a door and a fire escape any amateur could climb. That's my home. That's a tragedy waiting to happen. His voice rose, frustration breaking through his controlled exterior. You want to talk about cages? You're in one right now. A cage made of pride and stubbornness and the belief that accepting help makes you weak. Susan felt tears prick her eyes. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. He stepped closer, his intensity almost overwhelming. Explain why you'd rather risk your safety and Ashley's than accept that maybe, just maybe, you deserve something better. Because better doesn't last. The words burst out of her, raw and honest. Because men like you don't end up with women like me except in fantasies and vacation flings. Because when this ends, and it will end, I'll have gotten used to safety and comfort and someone giving a damn, and then it'll be gone and I'll have to explain to my daughter why we're back in our tiny apartment eating ramen for dinner. Gustavo was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. What if it doesn't end? It always ends. Not if we don't let it. He reached up, cupping her face with a tenderness that made her breath catch. I'm not offering you a fantasy, Susan. I'm offering you a partnership. A real one. You work for my foundation because you'd be brilliant at it, not because I'm trying to control you. You stay in this house because it's safe, not because you're a prisoner. And maybe Maybe we see where this thing between us goes without corporate rivals and fear dictating the terms. Susan wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. But belief was a luxury she'd learned to live without. I need time, she whispered. To think. To process. To figure out if any of this is real or just adrenaline and proximity and fear. Gustavo finished. You're afraid. I understand that. But Susan, I'm afraid too. I'm terrified that I've finally found something that matters more than the empire I've built, and I'm terrified of losing it before I've even had a chance to prove I deserve it. Before she could respond, Elena appeared at the door. Mr. Costa, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Rossi is on the line. He says it's urgent. Gustavo's expression shifted immediately, all business. I'll take it in my office. He turned back to Susan. Elena will show you to your rooms. Please, stay for tonight at least. Let Ashley swim in the pool and sleep in a bed that doesn't have springs poking through. Tomorrow, if you want to leave, I won't stop you. But tonight, just be safe. He left before she could argue, and Susan was alone with Elena, who smiled with the kind of maternal warmth that made Susan want to cry. Come, dear. I've prepared the East Wing for you and your daughter. You'll have complete privacy. The East Wing was larger than most houses Susan had been in. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a sitting room with a balcony overlooking gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Ashley's temporary bedroom had a canopy bed and shelves already filled with books and toys that Elena had somehow procured in the hour they'd been there. Mr. Costa called ahead. Elena explained at Susan's stunned expression. He wanted Ashley to feel welcome. Susan sank onto the bed in her own room, a 4-poster monstrosity with linens that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Through the window, she could see Ashley in the garden with Gustavo, who'd apparently finished his urgent call. He was showing her something in the koi pond, crouched down to her level again, and Ashley was laughing with pure, uncomplicated joy. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Still watching. He can't protect you forever. A friend of Marcus. Susan's blood turned to ice. She screenshot the message with shaking hands and immediately went to find Gustavo. He was still in the garden, but his expression changed the moment he saw her face. He handed Ashley off to Elena with a gentle word and met Susan halfway. What happened? She showed him the message. Watched his face transform into something cold and dangerous, the version of himself that had built a $43 billion empire by being more ruthless than his competitors. That was a mistake, he said quietly. Dalton just made a very serious mistake. Gustavo, I'm scared. He pulled her close, and Susan let herself lean into his strength, just for a moment. I know. But I promise you, Susan Crayton, no one threatens what's mine and walks away unscathed. By tomorrow, Dalton will understand exactly what happens when he crosses that line. What are you going to do? His smile was sharp, predatory. What I do best? Win. That night, after Ashley was asleep in her canopy bed, Susan stood on the balcony and watched lights in Gustavo's office burn late into the night. She'd seen him make calls, watched serious men in suits arrive and leave through a side entrance. She'd said no to his offer. Said she needed time to think. But as she looked at the message on her phone, then at the secure grounds and the safety Gustavo offered, Susan realized something terrifying. She'd already made her choice the moment she'd gotten into his car at the cafe. Now she just had to find the courage to admit it. When safety comes with strings attached, is it still protection or just another kind of trap? What would you do in Susan's situation? Drop your answer below. Susan insisted on going to work the next morning despite Gustavo's protests. She'd already missed 2 shifts during the vacation, and the diner didn't give paid time off to waitresses who disappeared without notice. Besides, hiding in a mansion while Gustavo fought corporate battles felt like surrendering the last shred of independence she had left. At least let Marco drive you, Gustavo had argued over breakfast, his face drawn from a night of phone calls and strategy sessions. I take the bus. Like I always do. Susan, I'm not a prisoner, remember? You said that yourself. She'd softened her tone, seeing the exhaustion in his eyes. I'll be fine. It's a diner in broad daylight with a dozen witnesses. What could possibly happen? Famous last words, she'd think later. Words that would replay in her mind with bitter irony. The morning shift started normally enough. Susan tied on her apron, poured coffee for the regulars, took orders with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this job for 6 years. Her coworker Jenny raised an eyebrow at Susan's return. "Girl, you look different. That vacation did you good." Susan managed to smile. "Just some sun and rest." "Mm-hmm. And maybe a man?" Jenny's knowing look made Susan's cheeks heat. "Don't even try to deny it. You've got that glow." Before Susan could respond, the bell over the door chimed. 3 men walked in, and something about them immediately set off alarm bells in Susan's head. They wore expensive suits that looked absurd in the linoleum and vinyl diner. They moved with the kind of coordinated purpose that spoke of rehearsal. And they sat in her section. Susan approached with her order pad, instinct screaming at her to run. "Good morning. Coffee?" The man in the center, mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, smile that didn't reach his eyes, looked up at her with recognition that made her stomach drop. "Susan Crayton. We were hoping to find you here." She took an involuntary step back. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "Not yet. But we know you." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Please. Sit. We have a business proposition." "I'm working. If you'd like to order, we'd like 5 minutes of your time. Surely your manager can spare you for that." His tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. A threat wrapped in courtesy. Jenny was watching from behind the counter, concern clear on her face. Susan made a small gesture, "I'm okay," that she didn't feel, and slid into the booth. Better to hear what they wanted in public than have them follow her home. "Smart girl." The man extended his hand. "Richard Chin. I work for Dalton Acquisitions." Susan didn't take his hand. "I don't know what that is." "Of course you don't. But you know Gustavo Costa." Chen's smile sharpened. "You spent a lovely week with him in Turks and Caicos. First-class tickets. Presidential suite. Quite the upgrade for a woman working at," he glanced around pointedly, "a place like this." Heat flooded Susan's face. "That's none of your business. Actually, it became our business when you became involved with our competitor. You see, Miss Crayton, Mr. Costa has something we want. Several things, actually. And we've learned that the best way to negotiate with a man like Gustavo is to understand what he values." One of the other men, younger, with cold eyes, slid a manila envelope across the table. Susan didn't touch it. "What is this?" "Photos. Very interesting ones. You and Mr. Costa at dinner. On the beach. With your daughter." Chen's voice remained pleasant, conversational, like they were discussing the weather. Quite the family tableau. Mr. Dalton was particularly interested in the little girl. "Ashley, is it? 6 years old. Attends Jefferson Elementary." Susan's blood turned to ice. "Don't you dare relax, Miss Crayton. We're not monsters." Chin leaned back, casual. "We simply want you to understand your position. You've caught the attention of a very powerful man. And when powerful men have weaknesses, well," he spread his hands, "those weaknesses can be exploited. I'm not his weakness. I barely know him. Then it should be very easy for you to deliver a message." Chin pulled out a business card, placed it on top of the envelope. "Tell Mr. Costa that Mr. Dalton would like to resume negotiations regarding the Singapore properties. Tell him that continued resistance would be," he paused, "unfortunate for all parties involved. Tell him yourself. We have. Multiple times. Mr. Costa is remarkably stubborn when he wants to be. But perhaps hearing it from someone he's developed feelings for might carry more weight." Chin stood, the other 2 men rising in synchronization. "Think about it, Miss Crayton. You're a single mother working double shifts to make rent. How much is your loyalty to a billionaire worth? Especially when that loyalty puts your daughter at risk." He dropped a $100 bill on the table. "For your trouble. And Miss Crayton? Mr. Dalton is not a patient man. Neither are we." They left as coordinated as they'd arrived, and Susan sat frozen in the booth, staring at the envelope and the business card and the $100 like they were a coiled snake. Jenny appeared immediately. "Susan? What the hell was that about?" I need to make a call." Her hands shook so badly she could barely dial. Gustavo answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. "Susan? What's wrong?" They came to the diner. 3 men. They know about Ashley. They know her school, Gustavo. Her voice cracked. I'm sending Marco. He's 5 minutes away. Don't leave the diner. Stay where there are people. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the fury underneath. What did they say exactly? Susan relayed the conversation. Every word burned into her memory. The envelope still sat on the table unopened. She didn't need to look inside to know what it contained. They left photos. And a message about Singapore properties. Gustavo swore viciously in Italian. The Singapore deal. Of course. That's worth $800 million to Dalton if I fold. He's desperate. I don't care about your business deals. Susan's voice rose, drawing stares from other customers. She lowered it to an urgent whisper. They threaten my daughter. They know her school. I know. And I'm handling it. Susan, listen to me. Marco will take you and Ashley out of the city for a few days. Somewhere Dalton can't find you while I know. The word came out sharper than she intended. No more running. No more hiding. I want this over. It will be. I promise you. But right now I'm going to pick up my daughter from school, and we're going back to your estate, and you're going to explain to me exactly what these Singapore properties are and why they're worth threatening a 6-year-old. There was a pause. When Gustavo spoke again, his voice carried something like pride. You're angry. I'm furious. Good. Angry is better than scared. Marco is outside. The black sedan. Go with him. Now. Susan looked out the window and saw the car, saw Marco's familiar face scanning the street. She grabbed the envelope and the business card, left the $100 bill on the table like it was contaminated. Jenny caught her arm as she headed for the door. Susan, are you in trouble? Should I call the police? The police can't help with this. Susan hugged her friend quickly. I'll explain later. Tell Joe I had an emergency. The ride back to the estate was silent. Marco drove with the focused intensity of someone trained for exactly this kind of situation. Susan clutched the envelope, feeling its weight like a physical threat. When they pulled through the gates, Gustavo was waiting at the entrance. He pulled Susan from the car and into his arms before she could say anything, holding her with a fierce protectiveness that was both comforting and terrifying. I'm sorry, he murmured into her hair. I'm so sorry. I should have anticipated this. Should have had people watching the diner. Susan pulled back, shoving the envelope against his chest. Open it. I want to see what they think is worth scaring me with. His jaw tightened, but he opened the envelope. The photos spilled out, exactly what Chin had described. Dinner. The beach. Ashley laughing with Gustavo at the koi pond just yesterday. The last one made Susan's stomach turn. Ashley at school pickup, circled in red marker. That was taken this morning, Gustavo said quietly, his voice deadly calm. Before you even left for work. They wanted you to know they could get to her anytime. Susan felt her knees weaken. Gustavo caught her, guided her to a bench in the foyer. I'm pulling her out of school, Susan heard herself say. Today. Right now. Already done. Elena picked her up an hour ago using the emergency contact I had you list. She's in the pool house with a private tutor I've had vetted 6 ways from Sunday. Susan looked at him, this man who'd anticipated her fear and acted on it before she'd even processed what she needed. You had me list you as emergency contact? This morning, while you were in the shower. I forged your signature on the school forms. He met her eyes without apology. I'm not sorry, not when it kept her safe. She should be angry about the forgery, the presumption, the way he was steamrolling her life with money and power and decisive action. Instead, she felt something crack open in her chest, the realization that for the first time in Ashley's life, someone else was carrying the weight of keeping her daughter safe. The Singapore properties, she said, forcing herself to focus. Tell me. Gustavo's expression hardened. It's a commercial development worth billions. Dalton and I have been bidding against each other for 2 years. I have the contracts 90% finalized. If he can force me to back out, he gets the entire deal and I lose not just the properties, but credibility with international partners. So give him the properties. It's not that simple. Make it that simple. Susan stood, anger giving her strength. You said I wasn't a corporate asset. That I mattered more than quarterly earnings. Prove it. Give him what he wants and make this stop. If I cave to this, he'll just escalate. Men like Dalton don't stop when you show weakness. They smell blood and go for the throat. Gustavo stood too, frustration clear in every line of his body. The only way to end this is to hit back harder. To make it clear that threatening you costs him more than the Singapore deal is worth. How? His smile was sharp, dangerous. I'm going to buy his company out from under him. I started the process last night. By the end of the week, Marcus Dalton will work for me or he'll work for nobody. Susan stared at him, at this man who responded to threats against her daughter by planning to absorb a rival corporation like it was nothing. That's insane. That's business. That's you trying to win instead of keeping us safe. It's both. His voice rose to match hers. Don't you understand? The only way to keep you safe permanently is to eliminate the threat. And I have the resources to do exactly that. At what cost? What happens if you fail? What happens if Dalton decides the best way to hurt you is to... She couldn't finish the sentence. Gustavo pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I won't fail. I promise you, Susan. I will burn everything I've built to the ground before I let anyone hurt you or Ashley. Do you understand me? Everything. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She believed he would sacrifice his empire, his reputation, everything he'd spent 20 years building to keep them safe. And she didn't know if that made her the luckiest woman alive or the most dangerous liability in his world. What do you need from me? She whispered. Stay here. Let me handle Dalton. And trust that I know what I'm doing. That's a lot of trust for a man I met 2 weeks ago. His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Then trust this. I'm falling in love with you, Susan Crayton. And I protect what I love with everything I have. Before she could respond, before she could process those words that changed everything, Ashley's voice echoed through the foyer. Mommy, Elena says I get a tutor and I don't have to go to school. Is that true? Susan stepped back from Gustavo, wiping her eyes, forcing a smile for her daughter. Just for a little while, baby. Ashley noticed the tears, her face immediately concerned. Are you sad? Did someone hurt you? No, sweetheart. Susan knelt down, pulling Ashley close. Mommy's just having a grown-up day. But I'm okay. Over Ashley's head, Susan met Gustavo's eyes. Saw the determination there, the promise, the man who would move mountains to keep them safe. She'd walked into his world. Now she had to decide if she was brave enough to stay. 3 days into their new reality, Susan woke to the sound of men speaking Italian outside her window. She pulled back the curtain to see Gustavo in the garden with 4 men in dark suits, their conversation intense and rapid-fire. One of them handed Gustavo what looked like surveillance photos. His expression as he studied them was cold, calculating, nothing like the man who'd read Ashley a bedtime story the night before. This was the duality of their new life. Breakfast with a man who made silly voices for Ashley's stuffed rabbit. Lunch alone while he took conference calls behind closed doors. Dinner where he'd smile and ask about Ashley's lessons, then disappear into his office until past midnight. The estate had become their entire world. 23 acres of manicured grounds, surrounded by walls that looked decorative but were reinforced with steel. Security cameras hidden in landscaping. Guards who dressed like groundskeepers but moved with military precision. Susan had counted at least 8 of them, though she suspected there were more. It's temporary, she kept telling herself. But temporary was stretching into something that felt dangerously permanent. Ashley adapted with the resilience of childhood. She loved her tutor, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah, who made learning feel like play. She spent afternoons in the pool or exploring the grounds with Elena, collecting leaves and rocks instead of seashells. She'd stopped asking when they'd go home. That worried Susan more than anything. Good morning. Gustavo appeared in the breakfast room, showered and dressed in another perfect suit. He'd been awake for hours, she could tell by the shadows under his eyes and the coffee cup he carried like a lifeline. You look tired, Susan observed, pouring juice for Ashley, who was absorbed in a picture book. Dalton's lawyers filed an injunction yesterday, trying to block my acquisition bid. He sat down heavily, accepting the coffee Elena poured. We'll win, but it's delaying everything. Gustavo. Ashley looked up, delighted. Want to see what I learned yesterday? I can write my name in cursive. His face transformed instantly, exhaustion replaced by genuine warmth. Show me. Susan watched her daughter scramble for paper, watched Gustavo lean in with exaggerated interest as Ashley carefully formed each letter. This version of him, patient, engaged, almost tender, felt more real than the cold businessman she'd seen in the garden. That's beautiful, Pequeña, he praised, and Ashley beamed. Dr. Sarah says I'm reading at a third-grade level. That's 2 grades ahead. You're brilliant. Just like your mother. Ashley giggled, but Susan felt her chest tighten. This easy domesticity, this routine they'd fallen into, it was becoming normal. And normal was dangerous when it was built on a foundation of corporate warfare and personal security details. After breakfast, Elena took Ashley for her morning lessons. Gustavo lingered, refilling his coffee. Walk with me, he asked Susan. I want to show you something. They walked through the gardens in silence, past the koi pond and the rose garden, to a building Susan hadn't explored yet. Gustavo unlocked it with a fingerprint scanner hidden in the doorframe. Inside was an office that made his study in the main house look quaint. Wall-to-wall monitors displaying stock tickers, security feeds, news channels in multiple languages. A conference table that could seat 20. Filing cabinets that probably required classified clearance to open. This is Command Central, Gustavo said, watching her take it in. Where I actually run the empire. Susan stared at the screens. One showed the front gate. Another the pool house where Ashley was having her lesson. A third displayed what looked like a building lobby in another country entirely. You're watching everything. I'm protecting everything. He moved to one of the monitors, pulled up a file. This is Dalton's security detail. I know where he is every hour of every day. I know his routines, his weaknesses, his pressure points. That sounds, Susan searched for the word. Intense. That's business at this level. Information is power. The more I know about my enemies, the better I can predict their moves. He pulled up another screen. This is his financial structure. I've been quietly buying up his debt through shell corporations. In 2 weeks, I'll own enough to force a board vote. Susan felt like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the generous stranger from the airport. Not the charming dinner companion. This was Gustavo Costa, the man who'd built a $43 billion empire by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone else. Are you afraid of what you're seeing? He asked quietly, reading her expression. I'm trying to understand it. You make corporate warfare sound like actual warfare. Because it is. The weapons are different, lawyers instead of guns, contracts instead of bombs, but the stakes are just as high. Dalton wants to destroy what I've built. I'm going to destroy him first. And where does that leave me and Ashley? We're just what? Collateral in your business strategy. Gustavo turned from the screens, his full attention on her now. You're the reason I'm fighting. Don't you understand that? For 20 years I've played these games because winning was the only thing that mattered. But now, he gestured helplessly. Now I have something to lose. And it terrifies me. Susan moved closer to one of the monitors showing Ashley. Her daughter was laughing at something Dr. Sarah had said, completely unaware of the security cameras, the guards, the high-stakes chess game being played around her. She's happy here, Susan admitted. That scares me too. Why? Because what happens when this ends? When Dalton is handled or gets bored, or you realize that playing house with a waitress and her kid isn't worth the complication. Susan's voice cracked. Ashley's already attached to you. To this place. To Elena and the pool and having someone read her stories who isn't exhausted from a double shift. Who says it has to end? Susan laughed bitterly. Reality says it has to end. We're from different worlds, Gustavo. This, she gestured at the monitors, the technology, the evidence of wealth beyond comprehension. This isn't my life. It could be. As what? Your charity case? The woman you keep around because you feel guilty about dragging her into your corporate war. Gustavo closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. As my partner. As someone I trust with the truth instead of carefully managed PR. as the woman who makes me remember why any of this empire matters. You barely know me. I know you count pills to make sure your daughter gets her full prescription before you fill your own. I know you tip in exact percentages because you understand what servers live on. I know you haven't bought yourself new clothes in 2 years, but Ashley's closet is full. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I know you, Susan. Maybe better than you think. She pulled away, overwhelmed. How do you know those things? Because I pay attention. Because when you care about someone, you notice the details. He paused. And because I had you investigated. The words landed like a slap. You what? Before I brought you here. I needed to know if Dalton had already gotten to you, if there were vulnerabilities I needed to account for. He didn't apologize, didn't look away. It's what I do, Susan. I gather information. I eliminate risks. I'm a risk now? You're the biggest risk I've ever taken. His voice was raw, honest. Because for the first time in my life, I care more about protecting someone than protecting my interests. And I don't know how to do that without using every tool I have. Susan felt tears prick her eyes. This is insane. This whole situation is insane. I know. Normal people don't live like this. They don't have command centers and security details, and she gestured at the screen showing multiple camera angles of the estate, surveillance of their own property. I'm not normal people. I never have been. He moved back to the monitors, his posture defensive now. My father built this company from nothing in a country that wanted him to fail. He taught me that power is the only protection that matters. That if you're not watching, someone else is, and they'll use what they see to destroy you. Susan heard the history in his voice, the wounds that had shaped him into this complicated, controlling, deeply damaged man. What happened to your father? He trusted the wrong partner. Lost everything in a hostile takeover when I was 19. Had a heart attack 3 days later. Gustavo's reflection in the monitors was stark, pained. He died broke and broken. I built all of this, he gestured at the screens, the empire they represented, to make sure that never happens to me. To anyone I care about. So you control everything. I protect everything. He turned to face her. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks the same. They stared at each other across the command center, the monitors flickering between them like a technological barrier made of cameras and data and the constant need to know everything. I can't change who I am, Gustavo said finally. I can't stop being the man who needs contingency plans and security protocols and information on everyone who comes near what's mine. But Susan, I can promise you that every bit of that intensity, that need to control, it's aimed at keeping you and Ashley safe. Not at controlling you. How am I supposed to tell the difference? By trusting that I know the line. And that I won't cross it. He held out his hand. Come. There's more I want to show you. Susan hesitated, then took his hand. He led her to another section of the building, through a door that required both fingerprint and retinal scan. Inside was something completely unexpected, a child's paradise. An entire room set up like a classroom, but better. Art supplies, science kits, a reading nook with hundreds of books. Musical instruments on stands. A telescope by the window. Everything a curious child could want. I had this built for Ashley, Gustavo said quietly. Whatever she's interested in, whatever she wants to learn, it's here. Dr. Sarah has a PhD in early childhood education and a background in gifted children. The best I could find. Susan walked through the space, touching the piano keys, the microscope, the globe that lit up when spun. This must have cost nothing compared to what her potential is worth. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. You said you wanted to give her opportunities. Let me help with that. Not as charity. As investment in an extraordinary little girl who deserves every advantage. And when this ends, when we go back to our real life, then she takes the education with her. The confidence. The knowledge that someone believed she was worth investing in. He moved closer. Susan, even if you walked away tomorrow, even if you decided this life isn't for you, I'd make sure Ashley's college was paid for. That she had opportunities. Not because I'm trying to buy you, but because she's remarkable and she deserves better than what the world has given her so far. Susan felt something crack in her chest, The walls she'd built to survive single motherhood crumbling under the weight of someone actually seeing her daughter's potential instead of just her needs. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because I can. Because she's yours." Because he paused, vulnerability crossing his face. "Because when I look at her, I see what I could have been if someone had believed in me instead of just demanding I be strong." Before Susan could respond, an alarm sounded soft but insistent. Gustavo's phone lit up immediately. His expression transformed from vulnerable to lethal in a heartbeat. "What is it?" Susan asked, fear spiking. "Someone just tried to access the school's records." Dr. Sarah's background file was copied. He was already moving, pulling up screens on a tablet. "Dalton's escalating." "What does that mean?" Gustavo's smile was sharp, dangerous. "It means he's getting desperate." "Which means we're winning." Susan watched him shift into battle mode, all traces of the man who'd built a classroom for her daughter disappearing behind the strategist who'd conquered industries. And she realized with absolute certainty that she'd fallen in love with both versions of him, the tender protector and the ruthless warrior. Which meant she was in far deeper than she'd ever intended to be. The attack came on a Tuesday, during the quiet hour between Ashley's lunch and afternoon lessons when the estate felt almost peaceful. Susan was in the library reading when the power died. Not a flicker, a complete, instantaneous blackout that plunged the entire house into silence. Her mother's instinct kicked in before conscious thought. She was already running toward the classroom when she heard it, the sharp crack of gunfire, distant but unmistakable. "Ashley!" Susan's scream tore from her throat as she burst through the classroom door. Dr. Sarah had already moved Ashley into the corner, her body positioned protectively in front of the child. Ashley's face was pale, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. "Mommy!" Susan grabbed her daughter, checking frantically for injuries, for blood, for anything wrong. "Are you hurt? Baby, are you hurt?" "I'm scared," Ashley whimpered. "What's happening?" Before Susan could answer, the door burst open. Marco stood there with a weapon drawn, his usual calm replaced by sharp efficiency. "We need to move. Now." "The safe room." "Where's Gustavo?" "Dealing with it." "This way." Quickly. Marco led them through corridors Susan had never seen, downstairs she didn't know existed. Dr. Sarah followed, silent and professional, her hand on Ashley's shoulder. They descended into what seemed like a basement, then deeper still, until Marco stopped at a steel door that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. He pressed his palm to a scanner. "Inside. You'll be safe here until Mr. Costa gives the all-clear." The room beyond was surprisingly comfortable, more panic room than bunker. Couches, supplies, monitors showing security feeds of the estate. Susan watched the screens in horror as figures in tactical gear moved through the gardens, too professional to be random criminals. "Those are Dalton's men," Dr. Sarah said quietly, her eyes on the monitors. "I've seen that formation before. Private military contractors." Susan stared at her. "How do you? I wasn't always a tutor." Dr. Sarah's smile was grim. "Mr. Costa doesn't hire anyone without very specific skill sets." On the monitors, Susan watched Gustavo's security team engage the intruders with coordinated precision. It was surreal, watching a battle unfold on her borrowed sanctuary, watching men with guns treat violence like choreography. Then she saw Gustavo. He moved through the chaos with lethal grace, directing his team with hand signals, his own weapon drawn. This wasn't the man who read bedtime stories. This was someone else entirely, someone comfortable with violence, someone who'd probably done this before. "He's going to get himself killed," Susan breathed. "No." Dr. Sarah's voice was certain. "He's going to win. He always does." The firefight lasted 7 minutes. Susan counted every second while holding Ashley, whispering reassurances she didn't believe, watching the man she'd fallen in love with become someone she barely recognized. When it ended, 4 of the intruders were down. The rest retreated in a vehicle that was already being tracked by Gustavo's team. The monitors showed Marco speaking rapidly into his phone, coordinating something Susan couldn't hear. Then Gustavo's face filled one of the screens. "Susan, it's over. You can come up." His voice through the intercom was steady, controlled. Like he hadn't just engaged in an actual gunfight on his own property. The walk back upstairs felt surreal. Susan carried Ashley, who'd gone quiet in that too silent way that meant she was processing trauma. Dr. Sarah walked ahead, her demeanor completely changed, alert, watchful, nothing like the gentle educator from this morning. Gustavo met them in the main hall. He'd removed his jacket, and Susan could see the tactical vest underneath. His hands were steady as he reached for Ashley. "Hey, Pequeña. You were very brave." Ashley buried her face in his shoulder, and Susan watched him close his eyes, holding her daughter with a tenderness that seemed impossible from a man who'd been holding a gun minutes ago. "Take her to Elena," Gustavo said quietly to Dr. Sarah. "Hot chocolate. Cartoons. Whatever she wants." Once Ashley was out of earshot, Gustavo's composure cracked. "I'm sorry. God, Susan, I'm so sorry. I thought we had more time. I thought you thought wrong." Susan's voice was cold, shock giving way to fury. "There were men with guns. On your property. Near my daughter. I know. You said she'd be safe here. You promised." "I know." His face was drawn, aged by guilt. Dalton escalated faster than I anticipated. The contractors were ex-military, well-paid, desperate enough to, I don't care about the details. Susan's voice rose. "I care that my 6-year-old daughter just lived through a firefight. I care that she'll have nightmares for months. I care that your corporate war nearly got her killed." Gustavo flinched like she'd struck him. "You're right. You're absolutely right. This is my fault. I should have sent you away, should have left us alone at that airport gate." The words came out bitter, brutal. "We were fine before you. Struggling, but safe. Now we're what? Targets? Collateral damage in your vendetta." "It's not a vendetta. It's ego." Susan was shaking now, adrenaline and fear combusting into rage. 2 billionaires playing chess with real people's lives. And my daughter is a pawn you're using to win. That's not true. Gustavo's voice was low, dangerous. "Everything I've done has been to protect you. By making us bigger targets? By dragging us into your world where men with guns storm properties in broad daylight." Susan laughed, the sound hollow. "Some protection." Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Sir, we need you in the command center. Now." Gustavo didn't move. "I'm talking to Susan. It's Dalton. He's calling." Directly. The room went silent. Susan watched understanding cross Gustavo's face, watched him weigh options with the speed of someone used to making million-dollar decisions in seconds. "I'm taking the call," he said finally. "Susan, please. Just wait. Don't make any decisions until I handle this." "I already made my decision. We're leaving. Susan, we're leaving." Her voice cracked. "Tonight. As soon as I can pack our things." This, she gestured at the estate, the security teams, the life she'd briefly imagined could be hers. "This isn't protection. It's a war zone." Gustavo looked like she'd gutted him. But he didn't argue. Just nodded once, sharply, and followed Marco toward the command center. Susan stood alone in the hall, listening to her daughter's laughter echo from somewhere distant. Ashley, resilient and adaptable, already bouncing back in that way children could. But Susan couldn't bounce back. Not from this. Not from watching the fantasy crumble into something violent and terrifying and absolutely unsustainable. She found Ashley in the kitchen with Elena, eating cookies and watching cartoons like nothing had happened. The normalcy was jarring, obscene. "Baby, we need to talk about what happened today." Ashley looked up, crumbs on her face. The bad men came. But Gustavo's friends stopped them. "We're safe now." The simplicity of her understanding broke Susan's heart. "We're going home tonight. To our apartment. Just for a little while. But I like it here. I like Dr. Sarah and Elena and the pool," and Ashley's face crumpled. "Did I do something wrong?" God, that question again. The one that had started this whole impossible journey at the airport gate. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Mommy we need some space. To think." "Okay. Is Gustavo coming with us?" "No. Gustavo has to stay here and work. But he'll visit, right? He'll still read me stories." Susan couldn't answer. Couldn't promise something she knew wasn't possible. Because men like Gustavo didn't visit cramped apartments and read stories on secondhand furniture. They lived in estates with security teams and corporate wars that turned into actual violence. She was packing when Gustavo found her. He stood in the doorway of their suite, watching her throw clothes into the suitcase they'd brought from the vacation that felt like a lifetime ago. "Dalton's calling off his people," he said quietly. "I've agreed to split the Singapore properties. 60-40, his favor. He gets the win, I keep my company intact. It's over." Susan didn't stop packing. "Good. I'm glad. I'm also transferring $5 million into an account in your name. Before you argue, it's not charity. It's compensation for the danger I put you in. For the trauma Ashley will need therapy to process. For I don't want your money. Take it anyway. Please. Let me do this one thing to make it right." "You can't make this right." Susan spun to face him, clothes clutched in her hands. "You can't throw money at the fact that my daughter hid in a safe room while men with guns invaded your property. You can't buy away her nightmares or my broken trust or the fact that for 7 minutes I thought we might die." Gustavo's control finally shattered. "What do you want from me, Susan? You want me to apologize? I'm sorry. You want me to promise it won't happen again? I can't. This is my world. Dangerous, complicated, sometimes violent. I warned you. You seduced me. You made me believe," her voice broke. "You made me believe in fairy tales. In billionaires who rescue struggling single mothers and actually care about more than just the optics. I do care. I love you." The words hung between them, too late and too complicated and wrapped in too much violence to feel like the declaration they should have been. "I love you too," Susan whispered. "That's why I'm leaving. Because love isn't enough when the world you live in could get my daughter killed." She saw him absorb that, saw the pain flash across his face before he locked it down behind the CEO mask. "If you leave now, I can't protect you. I'll protect myself. The way I always have. Dalton got what he wanted. He has no reason to target us anymore." Susan zipped the suitcase with finality. "We're no longer leverage. We're nobody. Which is exactly what we were before you decided to play hero at an airport gate. Susan, please. Don't do this. Let me go." She picked up the suitcase, called for Ashley. "That's all I'm asking. Just let us go." Gustavo stepped aside as Susan walked past him, Ashley's hand in hers, their single suitcase containing the sum total of their brief stay in paradise. Marco drove them in silence. The city lights blurred past the window as they traveled from one world back to another, the transition as jarring as it had been in reverse. Their apartment building looked smaller than Susan remembered. Dingier. The hallways smelled like garbage and old carpet, and she watched Ashley's face fall as reality reasserted itself. "Welcome home, baby," Susan said, unlocking the door to their tiny space. Ashley walked in slowly, looking around like she was seeing it for the first time. "It's really small, Mommy." "I know, but it's ours." That night, Susan lay awake in the bed she shared with her daughter, listening to Ashley's breathing gradually even out despite the nightmares Susan knew would come eventually. Her phone buzzed. A message from Gustavo. "The account is active. Use it for Ashley's therapy. For a safer apartment. For college. For anything you need. Please." Susan stared at the message, then at the ceiling of her tiny bedroom with its water-stained corners and peeling paint. She'd walked away from safety. From comfort. From a man who loved her enough to restructure his empire for her protection. But she'd also walked away from gunfire and corporate wars and a life where loving someone came with security details and safe rooms. She deleted Gustavo's message without responding. Some fairy tales, she was learning, were too dangerous to believe in, even when they were real. When does protecting someone you love cross the line into endangering them, and can you ever really go back to before? What would you have done in Susan's place? Share your thoughts below. 1 year later, Susan woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the sound of her daughter's laughter echoing from somewhere in the house. Not the estate, they'd never gone back there. This was different. Smaller, more intimate. A brownstone in a quiet neighborhood where security was subtle and neighbors actually waved hello. Home. She padded downstairs in bare feet, following the sound of voices to the kitchen. Gustavo stood at the stove making pancakes while Ashley sat at the counter, regaling him with a detailed explanation of the solar system project she was working on for school. Real school now, not private tutors. A good public school 3 blocks away where she'd made actual friends and joined the science club. And then Jupiter has 67 moons, Gustavo. 67. Can you imagine? I cannot. He flipped a pancake with practiced ease, catching Susan's eye as she entered. His smile was softer now, less guarded. Good morning, mi amor. Good morning. Susan accepted the coffee he'd already poured, exactly how she liked it. You're up early. Conference call with Tokyo got cancelled. Thought I'd make breakfast instead. He slid a perfect pancake onto Ashley's plate. Someone requested chocolate chips. You spoil her. That's my job. He moved around the counter to kiss Susan properly, a gesture so casual and domestic it still sometimes made her heart stutter. Besides, you spoil her worse. I saw the receipt for the telescope. She's gifted. Dr. Chen said her aptitude for science is extraordinary. I know. I was there for the parent-teacher conference. Gustavo's hand found the small of her back, a touch that had become familiar over months of rebuilding trust. Speaking of which, the Foundation Board wants to fund a new STEM program based on Ashley's curriculum. They think what's working for her could help other gifted kids from underserved communities. Susan leaned into him, still amazed that this was her life. That the foundation she now ran actually ran, with real authority and a salary she'd negotiated herself, was expanding faster than she'd ever imagined. That's a big budget increase. You've earned it. The scholarship program you launched last quarter is already changing lives. Our scholarship program, Susan corrected. I just implement your vision. No. Gustavo turned her to face him, serious now. It's your vision. I just write the checks. There's a difference. Ashley made an exaggerated gagging sound. You guys are being mushy again. Get used to it, Pequeña. Gustavo returned to the stove, and Susan watched him move through their kitchen with the ease of someone who belonged there. Who'd earned his place through patience and persistence and the slow, difficult work of proving he could be both protector and partner without crossing into control. It hadn't been easy getting here. After she'd left the estate, Susan had lasted 3 weeks in their old apartment before the nightmares got bad. Not hers, Ashley's. Her daughter would wake screaming about men with guns, about hiding in dark rooms, about losing her mother. The child psychologist Susan had taken her to, paid for with money from that account she'd finally, reluctantly accessed, had been blunt. Ashley needed stability and safety to heal. Gustavo had given them both space. No calls. No visits. Just a text every few days. You're both safe. Dalton's handled. I'm here if you need me. It was Susan who'd finally reached out after Ashley's 4th nightmare in a week. A simple message, she asks about you. His response had been immediate. Can I see her? They'd met at a park. Neutral ground. Gustavo had brought a new book about sea turtles, and Ashley had thrown herself at him with the uncomplicated joy of a child who'd missed someone important. Susan had watched them sit on a bench reading together, watched her daughter slowly relax in a way she hadn't since the attack. I miss the pool, Ashley had said. And Elena. And my big room. I know, Carino. I miss you too. Why can't we live with you anymore? Gustavo had looked at Susan over Ashley's head, and she'd seen the question there, the hope he was trying hard not to show. Because sometimes grown-ups need time to figure things out, Susan had answered. But Ashley, with the clarity children sometimes possessed, had cut through the complexity. Are you still figuring? Or are you just scared? The question had haunted Susan for days. Was she protecting Ashley, or was she letting fear make decisions for both of them? She'd called Gustavo that night. Tell me what's changed. With Dalton. With your security. With everything that made it dangerous. He'd been honest, brutally so. I restructured the company. Promoted Marco to head of security with explicit instructions. No more fortress mentality. Reasonable precautions, not paranoia. I sold the estate, too many bad memories. Bought a brownstone in a regular neighborhood with a good school district. I see a therapist twice a week to address my control issues. And I've been learning slowly, badly, but learning how to protect without suffocating. Why? Because I love you. Because I love Ashley. Because the man I was at that estate, the one who thought security cameras and safe rooms meant safety, was wrong. You can't build a life on fear. You taught me that. It had taken another month of careful visits, of therapy sessions together, of Gustavo proving through action rather than words that he'd meant what he said. Of Susan learning to voice her needs instead of just leaving when things got hard. Of both of them figuring out how to build something real from the wreckage of their false start. Now, watching him make pancakes in their shared kitchen while their daughter, and she was theirs now, in every way that mattered, talked about planets, Susan felt the last piece of armor around her heart finally dissolve. "What are you thinking?" Gustavo asked, catching her staring. "That I'm happy. Terrifyingly, vulnerably happy." He moved to her, flower on his hands, love in his eyes. "Good terrifying or bad terrifying? The kind where I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. No more shoes. I'm all out of shoes." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "Just pancakes and parent-teacher conferences and maybe, if you're interested, a conversation about making this official." Susan's heart stuttered. "Official?" Gustavo reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. Then I realized with you every moment is right." He opened the box. The ring inside was beautiful, elegant, simple, nothing ostentatious. Exactly her style. "Susan Crayton, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that love and protection can coexist? That we can build something neither too safe nor too dangerous, but perfectly, imperfectly ours?" Ashley had abandoned her pancakes, watching with wide eyes. "Say yes, Mommy. Please say yes." Susan looked at her daughter's hopeful face, at Gustavo's vulnerable expression, at the ring that represented a promise they'd already been keeping for months. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Gustavo slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands, and Ashley cheered, and somewhere in the background the pancakes were probably burning, but none of them cared. They were a family. The unlikely, impossible, absolutely real family that had started with 2 tickets she couldn't afford and a man who'd decided to pay it forward. "I love you," Gustavo murmured against her hair. "Both of you. More than empires or deals or anything I've ever built. We love you too." Susan pulled Ashley into their embrace, the 3 of them standing in their kitchen while pancakes smoked and coffee cooled and joy felt like the most natural thing in the world. Later, after breakfast and after Ashley had run to call her grandmother with the news, Susan and Gustavo stood on their small balcony overlooking the tree-lined street. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up the estate, restructuring everything, changing your whole life?" "Every day I wake up next to you, I regret nothing." He pulled her close. "The empire I built was impressive. But the life we're building? That's extraordinary." "We still have security," Susan observed, nodding toward the discreet car parked across the street. "We do. But now it's proportional. Reasonable. A safety net, not a cage." He tilted her face up. "You taught me the difference. And you taught me that accepting help doesn't make me weak." "We taught each other," Gustavo corrected. "That's what partners do." From inside, Ashley called out, asking if they could go to the Science Museum that afternoon. Gustavo squeezed Susan's hand and called back that they absolutely could. This was their life now. Museums and homework and foundation work that actually mattered. Security that protected without imprisoning. Love that had survived corporate wars and personal fears, and the hard work of 2 damaged people learning to trust. That night, after Ashley was asleep and the city hummed quietly beyond their windows, Susan looked at the ring on her finger and thought about the woman she'd been at that airport gate. Desperate, struggling, certain that life was about survival rather than joy. She thought about the man Gustavo had been ruthless, isolated, measuring worth in spreadsheets and stock prices. They'd both been broken in different ways. And somehow, impossibly, they'd helped each other heal. "What are you thinking?" Gustavo asked, pulling her close in their bed, in their home, with their daughter asleep down the hall. "That vacations aren't really escapes," Susan said softly. "They're just places where you remember who you want to be. And if you're very, very lucky, you find someone who wants to be that person with you." Gustavo kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. "We're very lucky." "We are," Susan agreed. And for the first time in her life, she actually believed it. Outside, the city sparkled with possibility. Inside, a family slept in perfect, hard-won, and absolutely real. The vacation that had started with despair and intervention had become something neither of them could have imagined, a permanent escape from the lives they'd been living into the life they were meant to share. And every morning, when Susan woke to sunlight and laughter and the man who'd changed everything by simply caring, she gave silent thanks to the ticketing error that had broken her heart at an airport gate. Some miracles, she'd learned, looked like disasters at first. But if you were brave enough to accept them, to work for them, to fight for them, to believe in them even when they seemed impossible, they could transform into something more beautiful than any paradise. They could become home. Thank you for listening until the very end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story. There's another story like the one you just enjoyed on your left screen.